What's up guys? In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace a basement window so that you can take old, nasty, or even broken windows and turn them into this. In this video, I'm going to show you how to remove the existing window, how to clean up the rough and opening, how to install the new window, how to insulate around it, and finally how to make the final touches on the exterior. And I'm also going to show you how to trim out the interior for a finished basement look. Let's get into it. So when I bought this fixer-upper property, the existing windows were in pretty bad shape. They're the steel type that's cast into the actual concrete foundation, and the first step in actually getting these out was to remove the glass insert, and I just got this out of the way so I wasn't dealing with glass. You might have to use a little bit of elbow grease to actually remove these, but with a little bit of wiggling back and forth, it wasn't too bad. So after getting the glass panels out, here's a look at the perimeter of the window. As you can see, it's made of metal and it's basically cast into the sides and bottom of the concrete foundation, which is great when it's installed, but it's a little bit of a pain to actually remove it in the future. So after fumbling my way through the first two windows, I finally found out the secret, at least in my opinion, which is to cut the top center of the window. And once you cut that with a sawzall equipped with a metal blade, you'll be able to pry the sides out of place. At least I was. Use a pry bar to get both of the sides relatively loose, and once those are loose, you can start working on the bottom. You're basically gonna just pull and pry, use a pry bar as needed and get that loose, but I found that after you wiggle it back and forth enough, it'll kind of free itself from the concrete that it was cast in, and you'll be able to lift the entire window assembly out of place. After removing the existing window, use a vacuum to get rid of any dirt, dust, or debris that was left in place. Here's a look at the window. Not super pretty, but we'll clean that up in a minute. Now, finding suitable replacement windows for the old basement windows can be a bit of a challenge, but you just need to find something that's going to be slightly smaller than the existing rough opening in terms of length and height. So the replacement basement windows I found have these mounting flanges on the perimeter, but since those are for new construction, we're going to use a utility knife and snippers to cut those off. It really wasn't hard, just score along the window, cut the sides, and then you'll be able to bend them over and snap them off pretty easily. Simple as that. After removing those mounting flanges, I took the window and I preliminarily positioned it in place within the rough opening just to get an idea of how it was looking. Next, you want to use some shims to space around the top, sides, and bottom of the window so that there's an even gap on all of the sides. After putting in the first couple shims, use a level to make sure the window is perfectly plumb, and then check to make sure it's perfectly level. Make any adjustments, add additional shims, remove shims as necessary, and try to get the even spacing around the entire perimeter, and also make sure that your window is level and plumb. Once you're happy with how the window is sitting in place, you're going to take some window and door spray foam insulation, and you're going to spray it in the gap between the window and the concrete foundation. You want to spray enough insulation so that you don't have a draft going around the window, but try to minimize overspray because you're going to have to go back later on and cut off all the excess. Continue to apply spray foam insulation to all the gaps on the exterior of the window, and then I recommend that you go to the interior side of the window and continue to apply spray foam insulation to ensure that you don't have any air gaps between the window and the window's rough-in frame. I was filming as I applied this, so it doesn't look super great, and I have a lot of overspray, and I had to go back and fill in some areas, but hopefully you get the picture, and if you're doing it without a camera, it'll hopefully go a little bit smoother. So a quick note is that some windows have penetrations where you can screw through the window and into the foundation or into the framing above. Mine didn't, and from the research I did online, I found that spray foam insulation, when you apply enough of it, it's going to hold that window in nice and snugly, especially once we put in the concrete on the outside and caulk it in place. I've had these windows installed for over a year now and haven't had any problems, but if you want that extra security, look at ways to screw through the window into the foundation. After giving the spray foam a couple hours just to fully cure and harden, I took a utility knife and I scored and snapped the shims in place, and then I took a longer utility knife to cut off the excess spray foam by running it along the window to cut off any of the overspray. As you can see here, there was a lot of excess spray foam insulation, which was a result of me being a little heavy-handed on the spray foam insulation trigger, which is a lesson learned for next time. Here's a look at the spray foam that was removed on the inside of the window. Not perfect, but most of the excess was taken care of. And if your basement is unfinished and you were just replacing a broken window, you can honestly stop here on the inside. But on the outside, you're going to want to mix up some rapid setting concrete and make any repairs to the foundation along the bottom. As you can see here, we had a little bit of a bigger gap along the bottom of the window, which I filled in with the concrete there, and then I painted it to match the rest of the foundation. Then for the rest of the gaps on the sides and top, you're going to use a high quality exterior sealant to seal around the window. And after caulking, you should have a window that looks like this. After finishing on the exterior, now we're gonna trim out the inside of the window so that you can get a finished basement look like this. Let's get into it. So here's where this project starts. As you can see, we already framed the walls and we installed the drywall in the basement. I have videos for both those projects if you want to check them out. But the big thing to note here is that I framed the walls so that they were perfectly in line with the cinder block rough-in opening, and then I put the bottom of the windowsill framing so that when I put the windowsill on top of it, it's gonna contact the bottom of the window. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So taking the drywall, I'm cutting it to size with a utility knife, and as you can see here, I'm fitting it on the top so that it contacts the window and that it's flush with the front of that framing there. After installing that top piece of drywall, we're gonna cut the drywall for the sides. So get your measurement from the drywall at the top to the windowsill there, and then cut the drywall to size using a utility knife and a straight edge. For more information on how to cut and install drywall, you can check out my drywall installation tips video. So as you can see here, I cut the drywall to the right height, but I left it a little bit long, and then I'm gonna push it all the way in so that it's contacting the side of the window, as you can see, and then I'm gonna take a utility knife to score it along the face of the drywall so that it's perfectly flush with the wall, and then snap it and cut the other side of the paper. After cutting it to the right size, I used a few drywall screws and fastened it to the framing. I put about 4 or 5 screws per side of drywall. Then I repeated this process for the other side, scoring and snapping the drywall to the right size and making sure that it's perfectly flush all the way around, as you can see. A quick note is that this drywall method of trimming around a window is kind of a cheap, inexpensive way to get around the traditional window boxes that are made of solid wood that you can buy. This is again just one way you can do it. It's a little bit cheaper than buying the actual window box, but as a rental project, this is fine for my basement. Next up, we're gonna get the length and width dimensions for our windowsill. As you can see, from the window to the edge of the drywall, we're looking at about 7 inches, and here I'm gonna get the actual length. And keep in mind, I'm gonna have an overhang of about 3 inches on either side of the window, and you'll see what I mean in just a second. For my windowsill, I'm using a 1x10, and I ripped it down to about 8 inches so that we have it about an inch longer than the depth of the window. Then I cut it to the right length, and that length is the window length plus 6 inches, because I'm gonna have this 3-inch overhang on both sides of the window, which I'm scribing out now. So what I'm showing here is we're gonna cut out that larger segment at the back, and then that little part on the front is gonna overhang the window and contact the drywall when we insert this windowsill into place. You'll see what I mean in just a second. But first, I'm taking a router with a 3/4 inch roundover bit, and I'm just giving the edge of the windowsill a rounded edge. Although this isn't necessary, I think it gives it a much more professional look. After giving the edges of the sill a rounded look, I took my jigsaw and I cut out the penetrations. After cutting these out, you're gonna have that 3-inch lip on both sides of the window, and then I used some 120 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander to make everything smooth. After sanding it down, it's time to do a test fit. Let's see how we did. Not bad. It slid in there perfectly. It's contacting the drywall, and it's also contacting the back of the window there. Not bad for the first one. So after cutting out the first windowsill, I repeated this process for the other 3 windows in my basement. That's rounding over the edge, cutting out the penetrations, and then smoothing everything down with an orbital sander. But here is where I made a big mistake. I cut my windowsill to length based on the unfinished dimensions of the window. So when I actually went back and finished around the outside corners of the window by adding the corner bead and the drywall mud, I added about 1/4 inch thickness on both sides. And as you can imagine, that extra thickness made it too tight of a fit for that original windowsill to fit, and I had to trim it down, which took a little bit of time. It wasn't a big deal. I was able to go back in and trim it to the right size, but it's a lesson learned that hopefully you can avoid on your project. So after finishing the drywall around the window outside corners, you're gonna go back and caulk the seam between the window and the drywall, and then I decided to paint my windowsills white. In hindsight, probably should have kept the wood look, but you live and you learn. And after painting the windowsills, I applied some liquid nails to the rough opening windowsill, and then I took the finished windowsill and put it on top, contacting the liquid nails and pushing it down in place. Then you're gonna use a level to make sure that you're both level across left to right and also level front to back. And after everything looks good, take a brad nailer and nail the windowsill to the rough framing below. And for the sake of full transparency, 3 of my windows went perfect. One of them had this gap at the top. I don't know if I mismeasured or what, but I filled that in with some quarter round that I glued and then nailed in place with brad nails. And at this point, I simply repeated the windowsill installation process for the rest of the windows in my basement. And again, that's liquid nails, install the sill, check for level, and then nail it in place. And for this slight gap underneath the windowsill, I applied caulk just like I did for the sides of the window. Sorry I didn't show that on camera. At this point, you've successfully trimmed out your window. Here's a quick reminder of where we started. And here's a look at the final result.
Driving around, singing songs way too loud because we wanna. Picking up our love friends, fill up the car till it bends because we wanna.
Again, this is just one way to trim out a window. It's how I did it. It's not necessarily how you should do it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.